On the night of her wedding, Emily vanished without a trace. No screams, no blood. Just a torn dress and an unlocked door. For 20 years, her husband Daniel claimed he woke up to silence and grief. But now he's confessed. He says it was an accident. The police say it was murder. And someone else says, hey, he buried the wrong woman. What if Emily planned it all? What if she was never the victim? This isn't just a missing bride story. This is a long game of obsession, betrayal, and the perfect vanishing. The air in the confessional was still almost sacred, but not even the scent of wax and cedar could calm the storm raging inside. Daniel Reeves. He shifted slightly on the worn wooden bench, his hands resting in his lap, fingers trembling with something far older than nerves. Guilt had a long memory. I need to tell someone, he said, voice hoarse. It's time. Behind the screen, the priest didn't speak. Not yet. Daniel wasn't really waiting for forgiveness. He just needed a place for the truth to land. I think I'm ready, he whispered. I've kept it buried for 20 years. He didn't expect a reply. He didn't need one. The words had already started to drag themselves out like corpses. From wet ground, June 18, 2005, the storm had rolled in just past midnight. Uninvited, electric, biblical dot. Daniel woke with a start, the loud crack of thunder pulling him from sleep. For a moment, he forgot where he was. The room was foreign, bathed in a cold blue light every time lightning split the sky outside. Then he remembered. The cabin, the wedding, the champagne. His hand reached instinctively to the other side of the bed. Empty, still warm, but empty. Emily. He called out, no answer. The only response was the soft knocking of branches against the window and the relentless drum of rain on the roof. He sat up, heart thrumming just beneath his ribs. The bedside lamp flickered when he switched it on, casting trembling shadows across the walls. Her suitcase was still in the corner. Her bouquet sat wilting in the sink, soaked in silver water. But something wasn't right. The bathroom door stood. Slightly ajar, Daniel stood, barefoot, on the cold wooden floor and approached. The door creaked open with a hesitant push. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Damp linen, wet earth, something metallic. Emily's dress lay crumpled on the floor. It looked like it had been dragged in from outside. Mud streaked the hem, and the bodice was soaked through, clinging to the tile-like shed skin. Emily. He said again, softer this time, like speaking too loud might shatter something delicate. Still no answer, no note, no blood, no sign of struggle. But the silence was too deep, too deliberate. Like the room itself was holding its breath. He checked outside. The cabin door was unlocked, swaying slightly in the wind. The gravel path was slick with rain, and in the distance, the lake shimmered like a black eye. Angry and endless, she was gone. In the confessional, Daniel exhaled slowly, as if breathing out 20 years of silence. I told them I didn't know what happened, he said. And maybe that was true. In the moment. But there were things I didn't say. Things I saw and ignored. He paused, eyes drifting upward toward the darkened lattice of the screen. You ever notice how grief is heavier when you're guilty? His voice broke around the edges. I wore the suit for 3 days after she vanished. Slept in it. Told everyone I was waiting for her to come back. He gave a hollow laugh. Only a few people knew we stayed in the orchard cabin. It was supposed to be our secret. Our little escape before the honeymoon. But I think someone else knew. Someone she didn't want me to meet. Outside the confessional, the church bell tolled midnight. Daniel didn't move. He hadn't come for absolution. He had come to crack open the coffin of the past. Inch by inch, his voice dropped to a whisper. There was a phone I found later. But I'll get to that. You need to know the kind of woman Emily was. The way she smiled at people and made them believe in something soft and permanent. Even me. He looked down at his hands, the gold band still circling his ring finger like a curse that hadn't lifted in 2 decades. She left something behind that night. Something I didn't understand until years later. Behind the screen, the priest finally spoke, slow and uncertain. And what was that? Daniel leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. Her silence. They say weddings are supposed to be memories wrapped in lace crisp linen, champagne flutes and laughter echoing under a summer sun. For Daniel Reeves, June 17, 2005, had all of that and something else. Something he couldn't name at the time. A cold current beneath the warm air. A pause before each smile. He had buried it for years, until now, peeling it back like old wallpaper. Finding the cracks that had always been there, thin, delicate, hiding behind photographs and frosting. The orchard estate belonged to Emily's father, a retired judge with a voice like gravel and a handshake like warning. His land sprawled over 10 acres with a refurbished red barn at the center. Vines curling along the windows, white paper lanterns swaying under the fading sky. Daniel remembered the way Emily looked that day. Stunning, yes, but more than that, distant, like her body was walking down the aisle. But her heart was somewhere else. She didn't cry during the vows. He had, still. She said "I do" in a whisper, barely louder than the rustling trees. And that was enough. By sunset, the barn glowed in amber light. Long wooden tables, candles and jam jars, old college friends buzzing with wine and nostalgia. The band played slow jazz, off-key but charming. Daniel stood outside the barn's side door, letting the air cool his nerves. That's when he saw her. Near the wine cellar phone, tucked close to her face, brows furrowed, lips moving as if reading or repeating something. He watched her from the shadow of the doorway. She didn't know he was there. A flicker of guilt passed over her face. But when she turned and caught his eye, she smiled like nothing happened. "Everything okay?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Of course," she replied, just thanking an old friend who couldn't make it. He believed her. He wanted to. Later that night, just before dessert, Daniel tapped a fork against his glass. "Just a moment," he said, standing. The barn grew quiet. He cleared his throat, holding his champagne high. "I've always believed that love isn't about finding the perfect person. It's about seeing someone fully. Flaws and all, and still choosing them." And being chosen in return, his eyes found hers. She was smiling, but something was wrong. Her eyes didn't match the smile. They shimmered too much, too long. Still, he pushed on. "To forever," he said. Guests raised their glasses. But her smile froze mid-toast, like a glass about to shatter. And in that moment, something fragile cracked, not loud enough for the room to hear, but deep enough for the memory to hold on to it for years. The first dance was awkward. Not because they didn't love each other. They did, or something close to it. But Emily danced like someone waiting for a train. Her gaze darted to the windows. Her fingers trembled on his shoulder. At one point she whispered, "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Daniel laughed softly. "No. This feels exactly like mine." She didn't smile back. They left the party early, just before midnight. The guests tossed rice, cheered, oblivious. Her father hugged her tightly. Too tightly. His voice low in her ear. Daniel never asked what he said. He should have. They arrived at the cabin. An old family structure tucked behind the orchard around 12:30 a.m. Emily said she needed a shower. Daniel poured 2 glasses of wine. Storm hadn't started yet, but thunder was already grumbling somewhere in the hills. She never touched her. Glass dot by 1:15 a.m. She was gone. Back in the present. Daniel sits in his car after the confessional, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Rain begins to tap the windshield, soft, then harder. He stares straight ahead, not blinking. I should have known. He whispers, lightning splits the sky. Rain hammered the windshield like knuckles knocking from the past. Daniel didn't move. He sat in the driver's seat of his car outside the cabin. Headlights dim, engine ticking. 20 years had passed, and still the storm sounded the same. He closed his eyes. June 18, 2005. Morning. The cabin smelled of wine and cedar. Daniel stood by the open doorway, soaked through, his dress shirt sticking to his back. He didn't remember falling asleep, but he must have. Emily was still gone. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. Instead, he made coffee. By 7:14 a.m., he called 911. "My wife is missing," he said calmly. "She disappeared sometime last night." Deputy Caldwell arrived first. Young, nervous, eyes darting toward the dark woods behind the orchard. Then came more cruisers. Flashlights, questions, boots, tracking wet footprints across the floor. Detective Maria Torres stepped out of the final vehicle. Rain dripping off the brim of her hat. Daniel remembered her boots. Heavy, purposeful. She walked into the cabin and didn't say much at first. Just looked at him, at the room, at the unfinished wine glasses. Her eyes landed on Emily's wedding dress, still on the bathroom floor. "You said she went to take a shower," she asked. Daniel nodded. "She didn't come back." No argument. No screaming. No, she was tired. "Did she take anything with her?" He shook his head. No purse. No shoes. Her rings still in the bedroom. Torres glanced at the bed. Perfectly made. So she undressed, left her dress on the floor, and vanished barefoot into the woods. On her wedding night, Daniel held her gaze. "I know how it sounds. You don't sound worried," she said, voice low. He blinked. "I'm numb, I think." Search dogs were brought in by noon. The woods were combed, the lake dredged. Nothing, no blood, no torn fabric. No footprints that held shape longer than a minute in the soft mud. Then, just after dusk, a farmer from a mile up the hill arrived. Wide-eyed and jittery. "Saw someone last night," he told the deputies. "Round 1 in the morning. Pale thing, running near the tree line. No shoes. Nightgown, maybe. Thought it was a ghost." Torres took notes, lips pressed tight. Daniel gave his statement 3 times that day. Once at the cabin. Once at the station. Once on paper. Each version matched. Word for word. That, more than anything, disturbed Torres. "I've been doing this job long enough to know," she later told her partner. "People remember chaos differently. He remembers it too cleanly." But she had no body, no weapon, number. Motive she could prove, so Emily Reeves was marked missing non-suspicious circumstances. Case open. Case idle. Neil refused to leave. For 2 more days, he stayed in the cabin. Cooked meals he didn't eat. Sat on the porch watching the woods. Sometimes he thought he saw something move between the trees. A shadow, a flicker of white. He never followed it. Present day -2025 Detective Maria Torres stood on the cabin's porch. 2 decades older, but no less sharp. Her fingers traced the old railing where Daniel had once leaned. She was back now because of the letter, anonymous, mailed to the precinct last week. It said, "I lied." She never left the cabin. There was no name on the envelope. But she recognized the handwriting. The key was small, dull silver, and cold in Daniel's palm, colder than he remembered. It had been taped beneath the top drawer of his father's old roll-top desk for 20 years, a precaution, he once told himself. But deep down, Daniel knew it was a monument, not to memory, but to guilt. The drawer creaked as he turned the key and slid it open. The scent hit him first. Must aged. Paper, old dust mingled with something floral, like the dried remnants of perfume. A time capsule of a life paused mid-breath. Inside lay only 3 objects. A wedding photo. Edges curled, a tarnished hotel key marked Riverside Motel, room 6, and a cheap black flip phone. Long dead, he stared at them for a long time, letting his fingers drift over each one like rosary beads. The photograph had been taken just after the ceremony, Emily smiling beside him, eyes looking somewhere past the camera, as if distracted by a sound no one else could hear. Daniel rose slowly, the phone in hand, and walked to the corner of the room where a frayed charging cable still dangled from the wall. He plugged it in. For a moment, nothing. Then the screen blinked. A dull green glow. The battery icon pulsed once. Then again, the home screen flickered to life. One saved message. Thread. One contact, no name. Just the letter R. His thumb hovered. Then pressed R. Is it still happening tonight? Emily. Yes. After he sleeps? Are you sure he doesn't suspect? Emily. He thinks I'm exhausted. I'll be gone before dawn. R. Once it's done, meet me at the station. You'll never have to go back. Emily. You promise. R. Always. Daniel read the exchange 3 times before lowering the phone to his lap. His face was stone, but the pulse in his throat jumped wildly beneath the skin. She was going. To leave, not just the cabin, not just the marriage, everything, and she wasn't going to do it alone. The sound of thunder outside pulled him from the memory. The same storm, it seemed, circling back 2 decades later. As if drawn to the scent of unfinished truth, he stood and crossed the room to his bookshelf, pulled out an old travel guide, hollowed in the middle, inside a Ziploc bag containing a motel brochure, the same name as the key, Riverside Motel. His fingers trembled as he slid the brochure beside the phone. What had Emily been planning? And who the hell was R? In the past, Daniel would have pushed the thoughts away, buried them beneath work, routine, bottles of wine left half drunk. But something was shifting now. He had confessed in the church. Torres was back in town. The drawer was open, and now Emily's secrets had weight. She hadn't just disappeared. She had orchestrated something, planned it, prepared for it. But if she had made it to the station that night, where had she gone? And if she hadn't, what had stopped her? Daniel stared down at the phone again, then typed in a simple reply to the old thread. The number was long and active, but still, the ritual felt important. What did you do to her? He sent. Seconds passed. Then the screen blinked. Message. Failed number no longer in service. Of course, still something about the act made him feel watched. He drew the curtain beside his desk. The street below was empty, wet. Still, he didn't hear the soft creak of his front gate opening, but someone had just stepped onto his property. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He stayed seated at his desk long after the storm faded. The burner phone resting beside the old motel key like a relic unearthed from some buried war. He felt the weight of it again, the one he'd lived with but never named. Not grief, not guilt, obsession. 6 months before the wedding, December 2004, Emily had been out for the evening holiday dinner with coworkers. Daniel had stayed behind, cleaning the apartment they'd recently moved into. He was organizing the bookshelf when he found her old address book tucked into a forgotten box. He wasn't looking for anything, but then he saw a name written in faint ink. Almost rubbed away, Ryan Lorne, a number, a crossed-out town name. He stared at it for a long time. He knew the name. Everyone did. Ryan was her ex-fiancé. College sweetheart, briefly mentioned. Supposedly ended years ago. Supposedly, 2 nights later, she came home late. Drunk, maybe. To herself. She kissed Daniel, dropped her heels at the door, and disappeared into the shower. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He hadn't meant to look, but he did. One message: Ryan, still thinking about you. No context, no response visible. The rest of the thread had been wiped clean. She claimed it was a mistake, said she. Hadn't seen Ryan in years. That it was probably just a holiday-drunk text, and she didn't even reply. Daniel nodded, said he understood, but something inside him cracked. Not loudly. Quietly, the kind of fracture that deepens in silence. That same week, he bought a disposable recorder and hid it beneath their kitchen table. Another went in the bedroom drawer. A third in her car, behind the glove box. He wasn't proud of it, but he told himself, love needed proof. The recordings never gave him what he wanted. No declarations of infidelity. No whispered plans to reunite. But they gave him enough to build a world inside his head. Emily humming after a phone call. Emily whispering, "I miss you too," into the wind one night on the balcony. Emily returning from errands with a look she couldn't explain. He began collecting artifacts, printed call logs, ATM slips, a blurred photo taken from a block away of her sitting in a parked car, head bowed, speaking to someone unseen. He stored them all in a black leather folder labeled ER, Emily. Ryan, even then, Atita confront her. He proposed. Instead, a desperate offering, maybe a way to lock something in place before it slipped too far. She said yes without hesitation, and for a time, Daniel convinced himself that danger had passed. But the folder remained. The recorders stayed. Just in case, present day minus 2025, Daniel rose from the desk and crossed to the hallway closet. Behind an old box of tax returns, he pulled out a fireproof bag, zipped, sealed. Forgotten dot inside, the affair files. He hadn't looked at them in years. His hands moved mechanically now, flipping through the pages like reading a case he no longer recognized. His own handwriting, so neat and cold, stared back at him, and then a photo he'd nearly forgotten. Taken outside the Riverside Motel, Emily, standing in front of room 6, head turned, smiling to someone out of frame. The motel key, the burner, phone, the message from R. And this photo, it all pointed back to Ryan. But he had never proved it. He never confronted him. Never even reached out. He had told himself it was because Emily chose him, not Ryan. That history didn't matter. That love could rewrite the past. But now the past was clawing back. Outside, a shadow moved past the window. Daniel froze, hand tightening around the folder. He waited, nothing but something inside him said, "It's time." It started with a phone call, short, formal. "Mr. Reeves, I'm working on a documentary about unresolved disappearances in rural counties. Would you be willing to speak with us?" He didn't ask who recommended him. He didn't need to. Daniel stood in the living room, watching through the blinds as the car pulled into his driveway. Not a news van, not a camera crew, just a dark sedan with tinted windows and a single figure stepping out, black coat, dark eyes, sharp lines beneath a gray scarf. Detective Maria Torres. Time had touched her hair streaked silver. Posture slightly stiffer, but her gaze hadn't dulled. He opened the door before she could knock. "You haven't changed," she said, stepping inside. "You have." He replied. She moved with slow certainty, scanning the house like she could smell the memories in the walls. No cameras, no mic. Just a notebook and a fountain pen. "Let's begin," she said. He nodded. They sat across from each other in the sunroom. Afternoon light painting soft lines across the hardwood floor. The recorder sat untouched on the table between them. A prop. She clicked her pen. "Tell me about Emily." Daniel exhaled. She was ... kind, not loud, but she filled a room. And the wedding. Beautiful. Everyone said it was the kind of day you only get once. Maybe that's true. And the night. He paused, eyes drifting to the window. She said she was tired, needed a shower. I poured wine. I waited. Eventually, I went to bed. When I woke up, she was gone. Torres nodded slowly, writing something down. Was the bed disturbed when you woke? No, he said. Still made. She didn't lay down at all. No? Did you notice anything odd in the bathroom? Daniel blinked. Just her dress, wet buttons torn. Torres' pen froze midair. She smiled politely. But something shifted in her posture, like a wire tightening inside her. You said earlier she never came to bed. That's right. And the door was open when you woke. Yes. And? Yet you remember. The dress had torn buttons. Daniel's eyes flicked to her pen, then back to her face. Of course. I found it on the floor. It was wet, she said, finishing his sentence. You've said that before. He nodded. It was raining. She must have stepped out. Then came back, ... I don't know. Torres let the silence breathe. Just enough to watch him fill it. Must have, she repeated. Her pen scratched again. But now, each stroke was deliberate. She didn't press him further. Not yet. But the logic loop had already broken. If she vanished before he woke, how did he know what the dress looked like? She closed the notebook gently. Thank you, Daniel. This helps. The smallest details always do. He smiled, but something about that smile, too smooth, too practiced, clung to her as she stood to leave. By the door, she turned. One last question, she said. Do you still have her wedding ring? He blinked. No, it wasn't in the cabin? No. She tilted her head. That's strange. A woman like Emily would never leave it behind. He didn't respond. She didn't wait for him to. Back in her car, she sat for a long moment before starting the engine. She didn't believe in gut feelings, not in court, not on paper. But Daniel Reeves had just remembered too much, and too perfectly. It started with the ring. Torres couldn't shake it. Emily's missing wedding band. She remembered the way Daniel hesitated, the way his fingers twitched as if they knew more than he was willing to let reach his lips. She never would have left it behind. That thought looped in her mind like a haunting. The next morning, she filed the request, reactivate the search warrant. The Reeves family orchard hadn't changed in 20 years. Gnarled apple trees lining the edges of the property. Long grass swaying like whispers. But to Torres, the land now felt heavy. Buried, waiting. She brought in a forensic cadaver team. No ceremony, no press. Just trained silence and a single canine unit. A lean black lab named Echo Torres followed as the dog zigzagged across the grounds, pausing, sniffing, moving again. And then, near the north fence line, where the orchard thinned and the soil turned soft, Echo froze. A paw lifted. A low whine. The handler knelt, marking the spot. The first shovelful came up dark and wet. Then another. Then fabric. Old, yellowed, laced with time and rot by the fifth layer. They saw it white gauze twisted around bone. A jaw cracked, a ring of pearl buttons and wrapped around it all, like a final breath. A veil, vintage, torn. Torres stood still. The trees swayed. She didn't speak until the remains were fully unearthed and tagged. The soil reeked of rust and silence. Get the lab on standby, she said. We're not waiting. 3 days later, the call came. DNA confirmed. Emily Reeves. Age at death, 27. Time of death, within hours of her wedding. Cause blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. The news broke like thunder. Husband arrested in 20-year-old bride disappearance, body found in family orchard. The groom, who never left Daniel, He didn't struggle when the officers came. He opened the door before they knocked, the same way he'd greeted Torres. There was no outburst, no protests, only stillness. She read him his rights. He nodded through them. The handcuffs clicked shut like punctuation on a sentence. He'd been reciting in his head for years. At the station, she sat across from him in the interview room. He stared at the table, not at her. "I didn't plan it," he said softly. "I swear." "Then help me understand." He closed his eyes. I woke up. She wasn't in bed. I looked outside, and she was in the orchard. Just walking, barefoot. I thought maybe she wanted air. Or maybe she was leaving. Ray. Pause. Then she saw me watching. She smiled. Like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. His voice cracked. She made me feel small. I couldn't let her leave me like the others did. Torres said nothing. Her pen didn't move. Because now, finally, he was speaking freely. When they escorted him from the station to holding. Reporters flooded the sidewalk. He didn't look up, but in the window of the cruiser, he caught a reflection. Emily's face, smiling, faint, gone. The recorder clicked on with a soft hiss. Case, no. 5-4 REO5. Subject, Daniel Reeves. Date, October 9, 2025. Recorded confession, interview room B. There was a pause before Daniel spoke. A long one. You could hear the clock ticking in the corner of the room. Then, finally, she told me everything. He'd rehearsed the lines. In his head, for years, silent monologues whispered into dark rooms, into pillowcases, into the soft walls of dreams that turned to ash before morning. But now, under the weight of fluorescent light and truth, the words cracked as they surfaced. She had her bag packed, not a suitcase, a backpack. She was dressed, jeans, hoodie, sneakers. She looked so normal, like she was running to the store. He laughed, once, dry, but she was running from me. June 18, 2005 to 1 a.m. The cabin was quiet, except for the storm. Daniel had been pacing, waiting for Emily to come out of the shower. But when she emerged, she wasn't in a towel. She was fully dressed, hair damp, shoes on. There was no hesitation in her face. Just resolve. "I have to go," she said. Daniel frowned. "Go where?" She lifted the backpack. "I'm not staying." "Daniel, I should have told you earlier. You're tired. You're not thinking straight. I'm pregnant." The word landed like glass shattering against stone. Daniel blinked. That's wonderful." Her lips trembled. "It's not yours." The storm raged louder. Or maybe that was the blood in his ears. He reached for her arm. She stepped back. "I'm not doing this again," she said. "I already gave you my silence for 6 months. I can't give you my life. You're my wife. I was your illusion." She turned to walk out the door. Daniel's hand found the neck of a wine bottle on the table. He said he didn't think, didn't plan, didn't mean to. But when the bottle hit the back of her head, it made a sound he still heard in his sleep. She dropped instantly. Daniel whispered into the recorder. No scream, just fell. He said he knelt beside her, tried to shake her awake, called her name, then checked her pulse. It was faint, then gone. I didn't know what to do. I didn't mean it. She was leaving, taking everything. The baby wasn't mine. She wasn't mine. There was a moment of silence in the tape. Like something heavy had landed and no one dared speak over it. Then Daniel continued, softer. I wrapped her in the veil. It was still hanging on the mirror. She'd taken it off earlier, said it felt too tight around her neck. Maybe it was. He carried her into the orchard. The storm hid his footsteps. No one saw him. He dug with a rusted spade until his hands bled. He didn't cry. Not once. Torres sat in the booth, listening through the glass. Her hands were still, her face unreadable. But when the words, "The baby wasn't mine," played again, her jaw tensed. She stood, motioned for the tape to stop. She didn't need to hear it again. Later that night, Daniel sat in his cell, staring. At the gray wall, no windows, no clocks, just memory. And in that memory, a sound he never told anyone about, not even on the tape, just after he dropped her into the shallow grave. He swore he heard it, a flutter, a gasp, a second heartbeat. But he kept digging. The garden behind the Reeves family cabin had once been full of lavender. Emily used to tell Lena that's where she wanted her ashes scattered, not that I plan on dying young, she had laughed. But if I do, at least let me rot somewhere pretty. Lena had rolled her eyes. You're dramatic. But now, 2 decades later, that laughter echoed like something stolen. They sat under a wide umbrella on the patio of a local cafe, cameras rolling. Torres had arranged the interview quietly, with a small media crew collecting oral testimonies for the public record. Lena hadn't wanted to come until she heard Daniel's confession. Then she called. I should have said something back then, she told the woman across from her. But Emily, she made me promise, and I was stupid enough to keep it. Morris had been Emily's closest friend since high school. Confidant, maid of honor, roommate for 3 years after college. She wore her grief like a scar that refused to fade, even as age softened her eyes and grayed her temples. I knew. It wouldn't end well, she said, voice brittle. Not because he was violent, not at first, but because he was. Everywhere. Always watching. She took a long sip of water. Double quotes Daniel was the kind of man who wrote love letters, not to express himself, but to claim you. I saw the way he looked at her. Not like a person. Like a possession. The camera panned slightly, capturing Lena's hands folded on the table, knuckles white. 2 months before the wedding. She said, Emily told me she wanted to call it off. Why didn't she? The interviewer asked gently. She was scared, Lena said, eyes narrowing. Not that he'd kill her, that he'd kill himself, or do something crazy. She said, if I leave, he'll disappear, or make sure I do. There was a pause. Wind fluttered the napkin beside her. I think, deep down, she didn't think anyone would believe her, according to Lena. Emily had found a journal in Daniel's desk just 3 weeks before the wedding. She told me it was filled with details about her, what she wore, what she ate, when she smiled. Every text she sent, every word she spoke. He even copied down things she mumbled in her sleep. And sketches. Sketches. Lena nodded. Of her always asleep or silent. She swallowed hard. She said it felt like being married to someone who'd already written the ending and was just waiting for her to act it out. Torres watched the footage from her laptop. That night, sitting in her motel room with a cold cup of coffee untouched beside her, she'd suspected Daniel was unstable. But this was something else. This was design in the background of the video. Lena's voice continued. I begged her to leave, said we'd drive to her sister's in Vermont. But she shook her head and said, he'll follow. He always follows. Torres paused the footage. REWOUND, he always follows. She closed the laptop slowly and stared out the window at the swaying orchard trees in the distance. What else had Emily tried to say, and who else had ignored it? Later that week, Lena walked the edge of the Reeves property for the first time in 20 years. She brought a single flower, a white orchid. I know you hated orchids, she whispered, kneeling at the edge of the newly marked grave. But they didn't have any lavender. The soil was still uneven. The headstone not yet placed. The veil had been given to evidence. Now sealed in plastic somewhere in a cold drawer, Lena placed the orchid gently in the dirt. I should have done more, she said, voice trembling. Behind her, the wind stirred the apple branches. Leaves spiraled like ghosts rising from the earth. Meanwhile, it's inside the local courthouse. Reporters crowded the steps as word of the confession tapes and garden grave reached national headlines. Obsession murder, they called it. The honeymoon. Homicide. But the headlines didn't carry Emily's voice. Only the people who failed to hear it when she was alive. Back in his cell, Daniel stared at the ceiling. He hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't spoken since the taped confession, but in his mind, she was still there, standing in the orchard, smiling faintly, not forgiving, not cursing, just watching. The courtroom buzzed like a hive, soft murmurs. Rustling papers, the shuffling of jurors settling into their assigned seats. Outside, the media swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras blinking like mechanical eyes, hungry for one more image of the groom who buried his bride beneath the trees. Inside, Daniel Reeves sat perfectly still, hair trimmed, suit pressed, hands folded, as if this were just another interview. Another story he could control, but this story was no longer his to shape. The State, 5. Daniel Reeves began on a gray Monday in November. Over 5 days, the trial unfolded like a carefully staged play, not one of murder, but of memory, of intention, of how well a man could lie to himself. Opening statements, the prosecution painted a chilling picture. A man who couldn't stand the idea of being left, who murdered not in rage, but in control. They presented evidence: the dress, the veil, the bruising on the skull, the buried confession in Daniel's voice. The defense countered with childhood trauma, abandonment, a history of loss and mental instability. They leaned on the phrase crime of passion, claimed he acted in the throes of heartbreak and betrayal. The word regret was repeated like prayer. Day 3, Detective Maria Torres took the stand. She wore her badge-like armor, but her words cut with scalpel precision. She testified not only to the investigation, but to the character she'd observed over 2 decades. The grief he performed wasn't grief. She said, it was possession, and when he felt it slipping, he took control the only way he knew how. She spoke of the drawer, the burner phone, the lie about the wedding dress, but he loved her, the defense argued. Torres didn't flinch. He loved having her, not knowing her, not trusting her, just keeping her. The jury watched closely. Daniel's face remained unreadable, except for one moment, when they played the clip of his confession, the line about her smile. Oh, it made him feel small. Something flickered in his eyes. Not sorrow, recognition, Lena testified the next morning. Her voice trembled, but her conviction did not. He was never angry in front of people, she said. But Emily told me he watched her sleep, counted how long she laughed at other men's jokes. She read aloud a line from Emily's old journal. He doesn't raise his voice, he just lowers the room. By day 5, the trial had become less about proof and more about belief. Did Daniel snap, or did he plan? Was this a moment or a lifetime waiting for permission? In closing, the prosecution said, he didn't dig a grave in a moment of panic. He dug it in a moment of clarity. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. The room, once tense with anticipation, had fallen to silence. Then came the knock. Then the bailiff's nod. Everyone stood. Daniel did not. The verdict? Guilty. Second-degree murder. Sentence: 25 years. No parole for 15. Gasps echoed. Someone sobbed. A pen dropped. Daniel finally looked up and smiled. As the gavel fell, Daniel smiled. As if finally someone had seen him. Not the man they'd described, not the monster they'd debated, but the boy who had once been invisible in every room. The man who watched people walk away until one didn't get the chance. Torres exited the courtroom last outside. Cameras flashed, but her eyes weren't on the crowd. They were on the sky, slate gray, unmoving. "I hope you rest now, Emily," she whispered. Behind her, the courthouse door clicked shut. Back in his cell, Daniel was handed a plain envelope. By a corrections officer, no return address. He opened it with calm fingers. Inside, a photograph. A still from their wedding video, Emily, standing alone in the orchard. Hours before the ceremony, staring directly into the lens, her eyes unreadable. And on the back, scrawled in shaky ink, "What if you buried the wrong woman?" The orchard was quiet now. No police tape, no cameras. Just a low iron fence surrounding. A rectangle of freshly tilled soil. The ground still bore the outline of the grave, even though the markers had been removed. A small plaque had been placed by the county plain bronze, mounted on a cedar stake. Emily Reeves, 1978 to 2005, she was light, even in silence. Detective Maria Torres stood just beyond the fence line, hands in her coat pockets. It was early morning frost on the leaves, steam rising from the soil like breath. No. One else had come. It had been 3 months since the verdict. The media storm had passed. Public interest had drifted to newer crimes, younger villains. But Torres remained tethered to the case. As if Emily had pressed a thumbprint onto her chest that wouldn't fade, she found herself visiting the orchard every Sunday. Not to mourn, to wonder. Daniel Reeves had confessed, had described every moment of that night. His voice, raw and low, still echoed in her head. But ever since the photo arrived at the prison, anonymous, unmarked, the edges of the case had begun to blur. What if you buried the wrong woman? That single line had unraveled her sense of closure. The photo itself had been examined. Experts said it was real, untampered, taken with the same model of camera used at the Reeves wedding. The timestamp matched the night Emily vanished. She stood in the orchard, veil off, hair down, expression unreadable, looking directly at the camera. Not afraid, not fleeing. Aware, Torres had revisited every piece of evidence. The DNA match, the veil, the dress. But it was the jawbone that gnawed at her, partial, damaged enough to confirm identity, but only with one sample to test against Emily's childhood hairbrush, submitted by Daniel. She hadn't questioned it at the time. Why would she? Now, as she stared into the rows of bare trees, a question bloomed where certainty used to live. What if Daniel told the truth? But not the whole truth. Inside Penrose Correctional Facility, Daniel Reeves sat alone in the chapel. The priest had gone. The room was empty, save for the soft glow of stained glass bleeding onto the concrete floor. The letter had arrived 2 weeks ago. No return address. No note, just the photograph. He kept it hidden between pages of a torn Bible. Page 120, Psalm 39. I was mute and silent. I held my peace to no avail, and my distress grew worse. He stared at it often, not for comfort, for contradiction. Because in that photo, Emily was alive. Not an hour before he claimed she died. Not curled beneath the soil in panic or pain. Alive, calm. Looking straight at him, he replayed that night again. In his head, as he had every night for 20 years, the sound of the wine bottle, the sudden drop, the weight in his arms, the digging. But now the images began to shift. Had she ever spoken after the hit? Had he checked her pulse clearly? Had he wanted to? A thought wormed its way in. What if she planned to disappear, and he just helped her? What if she wasn't dead? What if he had buried someone else? That was the cruelty of obsession. It blurred guilt into possibility. He didn't trust his memories anymore. And he didn't trust the version of Emily he had loved either. She had secrets. A burner phone, a hotel key, a second life, maybe a second plan. Back in the orchard, Torres crouched near the fence and traced a finger through the frost-lined grass. The earth here had been disturbed twice, once by love, once by justice. And neither felt whole. She had requested the exhumation, quietly, privately. It had taken weeks to approve. Bureaucracy didn't care for hunches. But a district judge had finally signed off, sealed. The grave would be opened again in the morning. She hadn't told Daniel. Not yet inside his cell. Daniel placed the photo face down on the Bible and lay back on the cot, staring at the ceiling. His cellmate was gone for the night, transferred for a medical check. The silence felt complete, and yet, beneath it, something pulsed, a feeling he hadn't named before. Hope, if Emily was alive. If she had tricked him, had disappeared just as he claimed, and used his guilt as camouflage. What then? Was he still a murderer or a pawn? Was the woman buried in the orchard, even Emily? And if not, who was? In the corner of the cell, the overhead light flickered once. Daniel didn't move. His eyes were open, but his mind was somewhere else now, standing in the orchard, staring at her smile. That final look. The next morning, the forensic team began to dig. Torres stood nearby, arms folded, jaw clenched, 6 inches. 10, 17. Then a layer of cloth, then bone. The remains were still intact. But something was different. A healed fracture on the right wrist that hadn't been noted in Emily's medical history. A mismatched molar. A scar on the femur. Too many questions. Too many inconsistencies for comfort. Torres turned away as the bag was zipped. Her heart thudded. With a new kind of dread. This wasn't the ending she thought she knew. Back at the prison, a new letter was delivered to Daniel's cell. Another photo, this time a train station platform. Empty except for a blurred figure in a red coat walking away from the camera. On the back, the same shaky handwriting. You never knew me, but I always knew how to leave. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he laughed, not loud, not bitter, just soft, like something breaking.